question to start off this morning is, have you ever done an impossible thing? Because if you've done an impossible thing, that would make it possible instead of impossible, wouldn't it? Because if it's possible to do, then it couldn't be called impossible. How do we find something or describe something that is impossible? When we say that something is impossible, are we saying that it's impossible for us personally? Or is it just impossible in general for everybody? I suppose that many years ago, somebody would have said, it's impossible for us to go to the moon, but we did. It's impossible for us to get a robot on Mars. And I think there's like 6 or 7 on there right now. Okay? So what was impossible before has now become a lot more possible. In fact, part of my job at school, I'm the gifted teacher at Biloxi Upper Elementary, is to help kids see that the things they think are impossible are actually possible. That you can't just say something's impossible and give up, because really it's just hard. And with hard work and determination, you can make the seemingly impossible things quite possible. That's my job at school, and sometimes they cry about it, but that's okay. Something truly impossible really only can be defined as something that we are absolutely incapable of doing without the help of God, who is capable of doing. So my question this morning is, have you ever done the impossible? Can you look back on your life and pinpoint a moment where something happened that absolutely could not be explained unless it was God doing it through you? Um, Looking back, I can specifically point out one time where I know the impossible happened, not by something that I did, but can only be explained as the intervention of God. And I'll probably cry while I tell this story, so here's this morning. When I was going to get my first master's in Fort Worth, Texas, it was a master's in Christian education, and it was at Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary in Fort Worth, Texas. And we had a class. This was not like the other classes. This class was a practical class. You had to put into practice. Now, for those of you who know me, I'm more of a study and take a test and write a paper kind of person. I'm less of a go and do kind of person, especially when it comes to sharing your faith, because that's what this whole class was about. This class taught you and gave you opportunities and gave you a bad grade if you didn't go share your faith. And I was all about the grades, okay? So, scared to death to take this class. They put you in these groups, and they sent you to an apartment complex in the middle of Fort Worth, Texas. And you would have to go with your group, knocking door to door, sharing Christ. Complete strangers. That terrified me. But at least it was with a group, right? At least I was, maybe I wouldn't have to talk. Although they gave you the script and they gave you the words. Y'all, that was impossible for me. That was scary. I'd rather take a test and learn the outline and write the paper, but doing that was so hard. So let me tell you what happened that day. We're going around the corner, and we're fixing to leave. It's really close to time, and we're fixing to leave. And we're going around the corner, and this gentleman comes up, and he's got 2 large grocery bags, and he looks at me and says, "You're Christy Crawford." Now, Christy Crawford was my name in high school. And I'm in Fort Worth, Texas. And I said, "Yes, I'm Christy Crawford." And he said, "I'm so-and-so." And honestly, guys, I'm so sorry about not remember his name right now. But He said, I'm so and so, and I graduated with you. We went to high school together. Here I was in Fort Worth, Texas. And here was a gentleman that I graduated with 3 or 4 years ago, also in Fort Worth, Texas. And we were fixing to leave. We ran into him carrying his groceries. And I offered to help carry his groceries inside. And he said, well, what are y'all doing? And we told him, we are here telling people about Jesus. So he invited us to come inside. And after talking for a little while, he got down on his knees right there in his living room at his coffee table. And he accepted Jesus. It can only be explained as an impossible thing because how else could that have happened? That was one of the most amazing moments of my life. And I can only say that that happened because God caused it to happen. There's no other explanation. In the same way that Jesus was the only reason that Peter was able to walk on water. Because can you imagine walking on water? Jesus created and spoke and was the word that caused the water to be. He was the master of it. Peter was not the master of the water. Peter knew the water. Peter worked on the water. Peter was a fisherman. He was pretty familiar with the properties of water, having worked on it on his life. But Peter did not know the water the way Jesus knew the water. What Peter knew about the water was one thing. It was definitely not capable of holding him up. This is true. But it didn't matter what Peter knew about the water. He just had to know the one who knew the water. It wasn't his knowledge of the water that caused him to get out of leave that boat, but it was his knowledge of Jesus that had him reaching for the impossible and asking for the impossible. Asking for the impossible. Because if you didn't notice in the story, Peter said to Jesus, tell me to come to you. Jesus didn't say, hey, come on, Peter, come join me. No. Peter wanted to do the impossible. And I think that sometimes we forget that we can do that. We can ask to do the impossible things. It's okay to ask God to do that because He will equip us and enable us to succeed even if we don't think we can. And it's something that we should do. The point is that no matter if you ask Him or if He asks you, Jesus makes the impossible possible and completely amazing. Can you imagine stepping out of a boat? I mean, literally stepping out of a boat onto water and walking on that water. I don't think any of us here could really imagine what that must have felt like. It's dark because it was in the middle of the night. There are waves and wind. Your friends are in the boat and they're looking pretty scared and a little bit out of like you're crazy for suggesting that you're going to get out of the boat and walk in the first place. So you're leaving behind the boat, your friends, and you're walking on water. We know that he had to have taken several steps towards Jesus. And it had to have been an absolutely amazing experience. Graduates, there are a lot of amazing experiences ahead of you. And sometimes you might feel like you're in the middle of a sea in the dark with the pressure of the wind from all the sides. And your friends might think you are crazy for attempting to do impossible things. Okay? Or even wanting to do impossible things. And somebody might try to convince you that the boat's going to be a lot safer. But you know that where the water is where Jesus is, and what can be safer than that? And it is a safe place to be unless you lose your focus. Have you guys ever been in a car driving somewhere and you're so used to driving this route that all of a sudden you get to where you're at and you're like, oh man, how did I get here? I really hope the lights were green. I don't remember stopping at them. I really hope that I didn't do anything like illegal. Have you ever done that? Have you ever been like in your morning routine getting ready and then you get through and you're like, did I brush my teeth? Did it did I remember to do this? And you're like you're checking, sometimes check to make sure your deodorant was still on, you're on, and oh yeah, I remember to do that, that kind of thing. Um, Sometimes our minds can get so focused on something. Usually we're in the car or doing our morning routine, we've got our minds on something. We're thinking about something really important, something that's going to happen that day, a conversation we want to have, maybe a conversation we've already had, and maybe things we should have said that we didn't say, something like that. Um, so our minds get so focused on something that our bodies can go through the motions because we're so familiar with that routine and doing that thing, like driving or getting dressed in the morning. Brain researchers called this our autopilot mode, which is run. So this is a real thing. So when it happens to you, know it's a real thing. Okay, it our autopilot mode is run by a set of brain structures called the default mode network. And yes, our brains can run on autopilot, especially when we have more important things to focus on. I think this is what was going on with Peter. His mind was so truly focused on Jesus, the one standing in front of him, the amazing idea of being with him and learning from him, that he didn't really at first notice the wind and the waves and the friends back in the boat, at least for a little while. It's very likely that he took many steps outside of that boat before losing his focus. It could have been 3, 5, 20. All we do know from the story is that he was far enough away from the boat that he wasn't touching the boat anymore. And he was far enough away from Jesus to begin with that they really couldn't recognize him very well. So he wasn't in the light circle of the boat. So that he had to get close enough to Jesus from the boat in order for Jesus to reach out and grab him. Because it doesn't say that Jesus ran up to him and grabbed him. Jesus reached out and pulled him up. So it had been pretty far. He didn't just take one step or two steps. He could have taken as many as 20 steps. So at some point he was out of the reach of everyone else and step by step walking on the water. But I think that that was an autopilot thing. Walking is obviously something that he was probably familiar with doing. Okay? And his focus was so intent on Jesus. And it says in verse 30 that he suddenly, when he got closer to the Jesus and further away from the boat, he noticed the strong wind. How could he not have noticed? Matthew tells us that Peter and the others had been battling the wind and the waves all night. It's the reason they were still out there. You just now noticed, Peter? There's wind. There's waves. Whoa. How could you just now notice this thing? It was what kept them from even getting across. It's kept them awake. It's been a very long day. How did you not notice the wind and the waves, because you were so focused on Jesus? And at some point he stopped focusing on Jesus and he looked up, looked around, and remembered where he was. Kind of like we do in the car when we suddenly get to a light and we just, oh, I'm driving. I better pay a little bit more attention. Those crazy, amazing, impossible things that I was talking about earlier, they're only possible when we have crazy and amazing focus on Jesus. And that's not easy. There are things in our lives that are so distracting to us. So many things that can keep us from seeing the face of Jesus shining through. Graduates, I just want to encourage you to keep your focus on Jesus. I know it's really hard to do that. And every one of you knows what you need to do to keep your focus. Um, you know when your focus is strayed. You know when you've started sinking. Let Jesus help pull you back up, and let us help you too. We're here to help you. We're here to help you stay focused on Him. The last part of this passage leaves me a little baffled. After Jesus pulls Peter up out of the water, he says to him, "Oh, you have little faith. Why did you doubt?" What? Little faith? Peter just walked on water. He got out of the boat. He took that step. None of the rest of them did. They're still sitting in the boat. Little faith? And then I remembered something. In Matthew 17:20, Jesus tells us that if we have faith the size of a mustard seed, then we will be able to move mountains. That's also an impossible task, by the way. A mustard seed is very, very small, tiny, little. It's little. Oh, you of little faith. Why did you doubt? Oh, you of little faith. Why did you doubt? That could almost be a compliment now, couldn't it? Little faith. After all, Jesus wasn't saying Peter had no faith. Just maybe that it wasn't quite big enough yet. Or he just had a doubt. But that's the thing about faith, and the same thing as about the mustard seed, it has a tendency to grow as we do. As we keep our focus on Jesus. We help it grow doing the same things that we do to keep our focus on Jesus. Jesus is like the sun to the mustard seed, helping it to grow. Little faith. That's a compliment. If I could only be accused of having a little faith, then I could do impossible things. But Jesus doesn't want us just to sit around waiting for our faith to grow before we do those impossible things. It's doing the impossible things that helps our faith to grow so that we can do more impossible things. I've had my share in the last 2 weeks of impossible things. I thought getting up here and doing this was an impossible thing. But after some of the things that I've gone through in the last 2 weeks, this is easy. The more we do, the more we grow, the more we can do, the more we can grow. Sometimes we might feel that we are wavering a little in our faith, or our faith just might not be enough to get us through. We might even feel like we're sinking a little bit. When Peter was sinking, he cried out to Jesus, and Jesus pulled him up and helped him back to the boat. This brings to mind one other story in Mark chapter 9, verse 24, where a desperate father calls out to Jesus, "I do believe. Help my unbelief." That always confused me too. I do believe. Help my unbelief. But can't you see where there can be both? Oh, you of little faith, why did you doubt? It's okay to feel that. It's okay to pray that. And it's okay to know that that's where you're at. We've all felt that or feel that maybe even today. I do believe, help my unbelief. I do believe that I can do impossible things today. God, help my unbelief. I've lost my focus, God, help my unbelief. My faith feels so little today, God. Help me grow. Help my unbelief. We can all step out to do the impossible, not because we can do it on our own, but because we know the one, Jesus, who can do all things because he's